carries. Orders of the day, daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Bobby Richards has been recognized by the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia with a Crystal Tourism Award for Experience and Excellence, and whereas Mr. Richards was presented with the Tourism Champion Award for making significant contributions to improving the current-day tourism industry, and whereas he has worked hard in his role as a taxi driver to understand and improve the role and impact that his profession has on visitors' perception of Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Mr. Bobby Richards on his Crystal Tourism Award and wish him continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas December 10th, 2011 marks the 63rd Annual International Human Rights Day, and whereas the observance of human rights provides us all with an opportunity to conduct a thorough examination of our thoughts, words, and actions, and whereas whenever human rights are violated, whether they are in our province, country, or in far remote places in the world, the decline in society is universal. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly acknowledge December 10th as the International Human Rights Day and recognize the powerful role education plays in disseminating the values of tolerance and understanding. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Scott Morrison of Flavour Catering and Fine Foods from Sydney was the recipient of a regional award and the overall provincial award for outstanding achievement in recognizing persons with disabilities, and whereas Scott received the award from Lieutenant Governor Mayanne Francis, and whereas Scott integrates persons with disabilities into his workplace and considers it a morale booster which makes his business a great workplace. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Scott Morrison and Flavour Catering and Fine Foods on winning this award and wish him and his staff the very best of luck in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since 1987, the Nova Scotia chapter of the Children's Wish Foundation of Canada has been working with the community to provide children living with high-risk, life-threatening illnesses the opportunity to realize their most heartfelt wish. And whereas Joanne Arbuthnot, a mother of 2 young children, has been painting a canvas a day since January to sell online and at a local craft show to raise money for the Children's Wish Foundation. And whereas her paintings have already generated $1,300 of the $2,000 she hopes to raise, therefore be it resolved the members of the legislature recognize Joanne Arbuthnot's hard work and creative efforts to raise money for this noble cause. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North. No, Dartmouth East.
Boy, you do that a lot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on the weekend of December 9th, 2011, Shuby Park will host the first ever community tree lighting celebration. And whereas the event will include music from local schools, special treats for furry friends, and marshmallow roasting over an open campfire. And whereas the event was created and supported by Planet Paws, Rodney Habib, and the entire Habib family, therefore be it resolved excuse me, that all members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating all those involved in making the first ever Shuby tree lighting a success, especially Rodney Habib and his family. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Oxford wrestler Maureen Hickman is a silver medalist who received that title at the Beamsville District Secondary School Wrestling Tournament on November 25th in Ontario. Whereas Maureen Hickman is a member of the Nova Scotia Storm Wrestling Club and has trained hard and has recently attended a training camp in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, with double Olympic medalist Tanya Verbeek. And whereas Maureen Hickman has represented the Nova Scotia Storm Wrestling Club, which offers an opportunity for Cumberland County youth to try a different and difficult sport, and is coached by Mark and Ruth Collins. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Maureen Hickman on this outstanding achievement and wish her continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do this resolution on behalf of the member from Cape Breton Nova. I hereby give notice and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 1964, Don Beaton began his illustrious career with People's Jewelry, and whereas Don Beaton provided 47 years of dedicated service, managing 13 different stores, and whereas in September 2011, Don Beaton retired from People's Jewelers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Mr. Don Beaton on his retirement from People's Jewelers and wish him all the best in his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Barra Food Bank Society has been serving the community since 1999, and whereas the profound generosity of neighbours is found in the spirit of giving shown by volunteers like Patricia McNeil, Charles McDonald, Dolores Murphy, Gail McNeil, and Michael McNeil throughout the year, and whereas families, businesses, and non-profit organizations support local families throughout the year through the local food bank, and the spirit of Christmas increases support when it's most essential. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend a special thank you and a very Merry Christmas to volunteers Patricia, Charles, Dolores, Gail, and Michael, and thank past volunteers, organizers, and contributors to the Barra Food Bank Society for the overwhelming support over the years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas hospital foundations are the fundraising arm of hospitals, and they coordinate the support of community for programs, equipment, and services not provided with government funds. And whereas the Cumberland Healthcare Foundation is dedicated to assist in maintaining high standards of health care for all residents of Cumberland County, and to this end undertakes an annual Light the Way campaign to raise funds for purchasing much-needed equipment for the Cumberland Regional Health Care Centre. And whereas this 14th holiday season for the Light the Way campaign, which allows people to remember those who are no longer with us, or to recognize others for their contributions in our lives by purchasing and naming a light, wreath, or an angel in memory or honor of someone special. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly promotes the season of giving by joining me in congratulating Cumberland Healthcare Foundation on their 14th Light the Way campaign, the proceeds of which this year will be used to fund a replacement system for the vital life signs monitoring system. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Greg Sparling notched his 1,500th lifetime career driving win at the Northside Downs in North Sydney, guiding 9-year-old mare Dusty Lane Last to victory. And whereas Sparling began his driving career in 1977 at the Tartan Downs racetrack in Sydney and moved to Northside Downs when racing returned there in 2007. Whereas a large crowd of drivers, family and friends greeted Sparling and congratulated him on his milestone in September of this year. Therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly recognise Greg's harness racing milestone and wish him continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquedobbin Valley.
Thank you. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sanofi Aventis Biotalent Challenge at the regional level for Nova Scotia was held in Halifax on April 19th at the National Research Council Institute for Marine Biosciences, where the high-level biotechnology competition was hosted by BioNova, the Life Industries Association of Nova Scotia. And whereas 4 of the 5 finalists at the Nova Scotia competition, as recognized in an awards ceremony held at the Prince George Hotel in Halifax, were students of South Colchester Academy in Brookfield. And whereas these finalists were Aidan Schenkels for his research on ammonia and phosphate in municipal wastewater, Maria Rutherford for her work on reducing food spoilage, Brandon Verboom for his project aimed at prolonging the post-harvest lifespan of Christmas trees, and Samantha Wright-Smith, whose work on bioremediation took first prize, thereby advancing to the national level in Ottawa. Therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly applauds the singular level of achievement in the science program at South Colchester Academy as evidenced in these results, and congratulates all these outstanding Colchester County students whose research efforts have resulted in this recognition. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demande l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le 8e festival des tournois de temps de Wedgeport s'est déroulé le lundi 22 au samedi 27 août 2011, et attendu que pendant les années 1935 à 1960, la communauté de Wedgeport était connue comme la capitale mondiale de la pêche sportive au thon, adoptée par une résolution par cette législature, et qu'en 2004, le tournoi était relancé. Attendu que 10 bateaux ont participé dans ce tournoi, dans lequel Phelan Leblanc, à bord du Old Eastsider et son équipe qui consistait entièrement de femmes, ont remporté le tournoi de pêche avec un temps de 626 livres. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu que tous les membres de cette Assemblée félicitent Phelan Leblanc et toute son équipe à bord du Old Eastsider pour pêcher le plus grand temps et remercie la communauté de Wedgeport de la relance du tournoi. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, in English, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 8th annual Wedgeport Tuna Tournament and Festival took place on August 22nd to 27th, 2011, and whereas from 1935 to the mid-1960s, Wedgeport was considered the sport tuna fishing capital of the world, adopted in this House by resolution. And in 2004, the tournament was revived. And whereas 10 boats participated in the tournament this year, and Phelan Leblanc and her all-female team aboard the Old Eastsider won the tournament with a 626-pound tuna. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Phelan Leblanc and her team for catching the biggest tuna, and thank the community of Wedgeport for reviving this tournament. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas survivors of sexual abuse suffer indignities that cause lifelong pain, and whereas it takes great courage for these people to come forward to tell us about their personal experiences, and whereas those who come forward but whose stories do not result in conviction of the abuser may feel despondent, that our society has not recognized what they have endured and that what was done to them was wrong. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House acknowledge the bravery of these people and all people who have been sexually abused, and offer our wish that they may find peace and know that they have the love and support of our communities in this province. Mr. Speaker, a request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bedeck Auto Supplies is a long-time and well-respected business, and whereas Bedeck Auto Supplies, with a staff of 9 individuals, is a thriving economic engine in Bedeck, having been incorporated 47 years ago in 1964. And whereas the maintenance and care of today's modern vehicles require knowledge and a mastery of technology that is available at Bedeck Auto Supplies, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly compliment Bedeck Auto Supplies President Graham McKenzie and his employees for their dedication to serving residents of Bedeck and Victoria County for nearly 5 decades. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sydney Mines Ramblers finished the Canadian Senior Little League Championship in 5th place after defeating Regina Leslie 6-3. And whereas Ramblers manager Jim Martin had Kevin Jolien pitch the entire game for the Ramblers, and whereas Mitchell Foss paced the offense for the Ramblers, going 3 for 4 with 3 singles. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate their Sydney Mines Ramblers for the remarkable finish to the baseball season and wish them well next season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried.
Thank you.
The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Monsieur le Président, date ultérieure, je demande l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le prix Argyle Township Heritage a été remis à Pauline d'Entremont en tant que l'auteur principal ainsi qu'aux membres du comité de la rédaction et de la publication du livre de généalogie intitulé Jacques Mus d'Entremont et Marguerite Amiro, 5 générations de descendants. Attendu que le prix est remis tous les ans par la Société historique généalogique de la municipalité d'Argyle, et attendu que cette reconnaissance est accordée à une personne qui a apporté une grande contribution pendant une longue période de temps, non seulement à la Société historique et généalogique de la municipalité d'Argyle, mais à la préservation et la promotion de l'histoire et du patrimoine de notre municipalité. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu que tous les membres de cette Assemblée félicitent Pauline d'Entremont et le comité du livre pour recevoir ce prix et les remercier pour tous leurs nombreux accomplissements et leur dévouement de la promotion de l'histoire du patrimoine de notre municipalité. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice in a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas the Argyle Township Heritage Prize was given to Pauline d'Entremont, who was the principal author, along with members of the committee for the publication of a book entitled Jacques Mus d'Entremont from 1679 to 1759 in Marguerite Amiro, 1704 to 1796, 5 générations de descendants. And where this prize was awarded each year by the Argyle Municipality Historical and Genealogical Society in its general meeting. And whereas the award was given to a person who has consistently contributed to the preservation and promotion of culture and heritage of not only the society but also to the municipality of Argyle. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Pauline d'Entremont and the committee that assisted her in the publication of the book on receiving this award and thank them for their dedication in promoting the history and heritage for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Almond Chisholm Wing was recently opened at Port Hawkesbury Nursing Home. And whereas the opening of the Chisholm Wing is the culmination of 2 years of hard work by all involved and is a great addition to the community, providing 12 new beds to the home and 25 positions for new employees. And whereas staff of the nursing home say the wing would not have been possible without the help of former Port Hawkesbury Mayor Almond Chisholm. Therefore, the new wing bears his name. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the hard work and dedication put forth by all involved in opening the Almond Chisholm Wing in the Port Hawkesbury Nursing Home and congratulate Almond Chisholm on this honour. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do this on behalf of the member for Cumberland South. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas Oxford wrestler Mallory Thompson is a gold medalist who received that title at the Beamsville District Secondary School Wrestling Tournament on November 25th in Ontario, and whereas Mallory Thompson is a member of the Nova Scotia Storm Wrestling Club who has trained hard and has recently attended training camp in St. Stephen, New Brunswick with double Olympic medalist Tanya Verbeek. And whereas Mallory Thompson was representing the Nova Scotia Storm Wrestling Club, which offers an opportunity for Cumberland County youth to try a different and difficult sport and is coached by Mark and Ruth Collins, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Mallory Thompson on her outstanding achievement and wish her continued success in all future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rod MacArthur, an outstanding servant of this House of Assembly for 35 years, 24 years of them as Chief Clerk, and whereas Rod's passion for the independence of this House and its members' privileges, as well as his extensive knowledge of the rules and procedures of this legislature, is well known, and whereas Rod's knowledge and experience is well respected across this country, as demonstrated by BC's call for Rod MacArthur to sit at their clerk's table, therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the BC legislature for recognizing a dedicated and highly experienced individual, Rod MacArthur. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Government business. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call bills for third reading?
Bills for third reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we now call for Bill 102 for third reading.
Bill number 102, the Trade Union Act, for third reading. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to move that Bill 102, the motion be amended by deleting the words after the word that and substituting the following therefore. Bill 102, an act preventing an unnecessary labor disruption and protect the economy by amending Chapter 475, the revised statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act, now be read a third time, but that the order be discharged and the bill be recommitted to the Committee on the Whole House on Bills.
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the third party wants this referred back to a committee that it was democratically taken from and brought to third reading. They had the amount of time, the 20 hours that we usually use in committee of the whole, but Mr. Speaker, choose not to use those 20 hours, but for some strange reason now want it reported back in a time that they did not want to use it. I think this is at best a dilatory motion, Mr. Speaker, and should not be allowed.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, far from being simply a dilatory motion, this is a very important motion to recommit because there is a lot that has happened even since the Committee of the Whole House met on this matter, Mr. Speaker. For example, we now know that one of the presenters at Law Amendments made some statements around, and I'm speaking of Mr. Clark, just to be clear, around his lack of interest and the lack of interest of the Federation of Labour and their associates in pursuing the Michelin bill. But since that statement was made, it's been reported publicly, and we've found out that he tells people that he routinely meets with every new Minister of Labour for the purpose of lobbying to make changes to or do away with the Michelin bill. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, it's very logical that at this point, in light of this new information, that the bill be recommitted back to the Committee of the Whole House so that the House in committee can make a proper further examination of it. I'll also point out, Mr. Speaker, that since the Committee of the Whole House last met, that a new group of employers in our province representing 9,000 employers and over 200,000 employees has written to the government and asked that the government reconsider. They've said that this will have a detrimental effect on the creation of jobs and opportunity in our province, that at the least, in the face of a majority government, that it deserves to be recommitted for further study. And so, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying to you is that far from being simply a dilatory motion, in light of all this new information, in light of all the public discussion that's gone on, in light of the unanimous views of the employers of the province that this is a bad idea, and in light of the fact that we have testimony at a committee of this House which turns out to be at variance with the stated intent of the person that made that testimony, which is a very, very serious matter, Mr. Speaker, that the bill should now be recommitted.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, whether those statements were issued or not, they were issued on an entirely other bill, as he mentioned, or another fact that was in this House over a quarter of a century ago, Mr. Speaker. And now he's trying to drag that up. I mean, Mr. Speaker, they are trying to drag stuff up that's over 30 years old to make a point that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, are we, because everybody in this province doesn't agree on a bill, we're supposed to now bring it back to Committee of the Whole? It makes absolutely no sense, Mr. Speaker. They are just sore losers. This should not be accepted, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the testimony that I'm referring to was on Bill 102, the very bill that we're discussing and that this motion intends to deal with. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, Michelin is the subject today because Michelin came before the Law Amendments Committee with regard to Bill 102 and called it a black mark against Nova Scotia. They said it would definitely affect their ability to make investments in our province because Mr. Rick Clark and Michelin made this an issue in committee.
Order, order, please. I've made my decision. I think that the motion is in order. And I think that we will now begin debate on the motion by the member for Argyll. And I'll remind all members should confine themselves to the motion that is the merits of recommitting the Bill 102 to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. I will now recognize the honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you very much for that ruling. Because ultimately, there's so many other things that have come to light over the last number of days that, have really pushed us towards wanting to recommit this bill so that it can continue to receive the true consideration of this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, we are sent here not only to oppose, and I know that the government is trying to say, well, you're opposing the issue, you're opposing the bill, but really what it is that there's so many Nova Scotians that came to see us, that, and spoke against it. If there was a huge lineup of Nova Scotians that said, this is the bill that we want, then of course we would say we would run it through the regular process and we would have allowed the vote. We would have voted no against the bill and that would have been the end of the day. But because of the number of Nova Scotians, and that we continue to hear from organizations that represent thousands and thousands of Nova Scotians, then we want to take this bill and move it back into a committee of the House of Assembly, which of course is the Committee on the Whole House on Bills, to continue the examination of this. And Mr. Speaker, is the issue of spending a little more time, that maybe through that the government might see the error of this bill in its entirety, and to be able to allow it to maybe be put away for a little bit until further consultations are had on this bill. Mr. Speaker, we continually say that there has been relatively harmonious labor relationships in this province for many years, being that there's really only been 3 cases in the last, since 1996 that have actually even come close to a requirement of first contract arbitration. So again, we can continue to question of why this is here. So that's why in third reading we'd rather move this back off to Committee of Whole House on Bills and to allow further look at this. We, of course, as all members of this House of Assembly has received, I believe, a letter. It was an open letter to the Premier that did show up over the last day or so, as members of the organizations were sitting in the House of Assembly, that were sitting watching the proceedings, and as we finished up with Committee of Whole House. The information, I think, is valid to allow for the recommittal of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to, as well, maybe read some points of this letter, again, which I think makes further case of recommittal of this bill. But also I think is very important that all members of this House, especially the members of the governing party, understand what's important in this bill, and why I think this again should go back to the Committee on the Whole House on Bills. And if I just have a little drink here. Not enough coffee this morning, so I'm trying to clear my throat. This is an open letter to the Premier. It's dated December 8th. And it comes from the Atlantic Building Supply Dealers Association, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the Canadian Restaurant and Food Services Association, the Construction Association, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Contact Centre Nova Scotia, Halifax Chamber of Commerce, Hotel Association Nova Scotia, Merit Contractors Association Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Chambers of Commerce, the Nova Scotia Home Builders Association, the Nova Scotia Road Builders Association, the Restaurant Association of Nova Scotia, the Retail Council of Canada, the Atlantic Office, the Sackville Business Association, the Scotia Group of Companies, the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, and the Truro and District Chamber of Commerce. So this letter that went to the Premier yesterday, co-signed by these organizations, again, basically say, with one voice, we've asked why this legislation is needed. The only response that you have provided that it exists in other provinces, the fact that the model being introduced exists only in one province, which is Manitoba. And I've heard members in this House stand on this and saying that there's only 4% of Canadians that are covered by this type of legislation, which is, of course, those workers in Manitoba. So again, it's an issue of why this amendment needs to be brought forward, so that we can bring it to further debate the importance of this letter correctly, so that of course we're able to fully give the vetting of this bill that is required. And I think it was very telling that this letter, and again I will table this as soon as I'm done with it. And it ends very, I believe, poignantly, because it says, "So together and united, Mr. Premier, we're urging you to step back. Consider the messages of your actions we'll be sending if you move forward, and compromise. We believe there's a win in this for us all." So you have, of course, thousands upon thousands of thousands of employers that Just want to get this copy for the Speaker. Thousands of employers who of course employ tens of thousands of Nova Scotians, saying the same thing, saying it in a united voice, that this bill is the wrong bill for this type of legislation. You know, this legislation is wrong. And I think we still have an opportunity to again send it back to this committee to be able to further discuss it and I think to hold it up. And maybe the government will find that there are maybe some drastic amendments that could be made on the bill, and ones that, after a true vetting and acceptance by the number of organizations that are listed in this open letter to the Premier, that maybe we can make it either a better bill or, of course, leave it right where it is. Leave it absolutely right where it is. Because, of course, we believe this is the wrong bill. The other great parts in this one is the comment on it where it says, united and unprecedented, businesses of all sizes appeared before law amendments. And this is true. We had small businesses, big businesses, business organizations and the such that came before law amendments. The letter goes on to say, there we suggested improvements to the proposed legislation that could maintain a commitment to collective bargaining and ensure that a third-party agreement is introduced only as a last resort. Such principles exist in all FCA legislations except for the model we seem to be intent on adopting. Again, we ignored it. Mr. Premier, and it goes on to say, there is still time to listen to our concerns and consider our amendments. And by doing so, you will demonstrate that you understand the debate around FCA has evolved into a much wider concern with the business community. At its core, it's about how government involves job creators in decisions and will ultimately impact how they operate. It is also about whether or not their perspective matters. Business owners need confidence that their government will listen and work with them to address their concerns. Now, more than ever, they will need you to give them this confidence. So these are pretty strong words, I think, from a large group of organizations that would continue to ask that further work be done on this bill. You know, and I'm not, you know, and I'm trying to be realistic about this. Is that I'm not going to say that, you know, government with all their ideas are not going to try to continue to push the bill forward. But, you know, there's many occasions, and if you can make sure there's another copy of that for me as well, that I can table it as well, that, you know, that if you go down this road and if there is, you know, a true consultation on this matter, that we as the Progressive Conservative Party can accept what has been brought forward by that community, that we can accept that, you know, maybe we don't believe in the premise of the bill, but if that or those organizations can accept it, well then, okay, I guess that's where we're going to go. But continually through this process, we've seen, I believe, to be a bit of arrogance, that there's really no listening to that true common sense that has come from many organizations that have come before this House of Assembly. And I can say that, sure, they've come to a lot of amendments and they've all presented in one clear voice, but we've heard it in many other places. I mean, I know that all caucuses had presentations, or at least the two opposition caucuses has had presentations by that group of employers and investors in this province, and you know, their message was clear, and I wonder whether the government did receive that same heartfelt, very structured, very informative, very important, very sensible presentation that was made by those organizations. And I would think not. Because ultimately, when somebody comes to present to any caucus, when they have something that is reasonable, you know, that the caucuses would believe them and understand them and present something that is, of course, in the best interest of all Nova Scotians. Of course, we don't see that in this bill. We don't see it anywhere in this bill, which is, again, why I think it needs to go back for further examination. It needs to be allowed to have true consultations happen on this, because it didn't happen. Of course, the minister has stood and other members have stood and said this went through a study day. You know, a bill that is as important as this one is, that apparently is supposed to do what it does, got 1 day of consultation, one. And it wasn't a true consultation. I mean, if you were saying that the organizations, the businesses showed up there to voice their concern, to see that echoed in a piece of legislation, then I feel bad for the people that showed up there and expected that, because that, of course, is not what happened. Basically, I think that that Nova Scotians, the organizations, showed up to this study day, this consultation, to hear what the government was going to do with or without the acceptance of the government. So the whole process has been one that has been questionable, which is why, again, we think that this amendment is fully within order to allow a recommittal to the Standing Committee on Bills, or the whole Committee of the Whole House on Bills. You know, just because at the same time we were asking, there's been a number of issues have been asked in the media, have been asked to the minister of, you know, where was FCA? And that's what we found interesting too, is that as this House got going during this session, there was a number of questions to the minister. You know, what are you doing about FCA? And what we heard is that we're thinking about it, we're taking that consultation, we're taking those submissions into consideration of whether or not we think that this is this time. So basically what's happened is that has been ignored. So that's why we think at this juncture that we as a party cannot allow this bill to go much further, that we need to have a further examination of this and have it recommitted, which again is why we believe that this should be recommitted back to the committee. You know, this is not done lightly, and I know that, you know, I saw the House Leader, Government House Leader, looking aghast at this move to try to recommit the bill. And I feel bad for him, because he doesn't understand that this bill will impact people in his constituency, will impact all Nova Scotians from Glace Bay right down to Yarmouth. And I don't think it's fair to them to all of a sudden have to hear their companies or hear their businesses say to them, listen, because of this, we're going to have to lay off people. We're going to have to not expand and employ more people in the province of Nova Scotia. These are the things that we continue to hear time after time about any first contract arbitration bill that has found its way across Canada. This needs a proper sounding. This needs a proper sober second thought, if you want to call it that. Again, I can't underline enough why it would be important for this to continue to go through the process, to go back and continue to have another look. You know, there are the comments, you know, I've heard some chatting going on behind me here, and the issue of, well, you know, you didn't use, and I know I heard the Government House leader use it as well, well, you didn't use all your hours. Well, you know, quite honestly, Mr. Speaker, there's further information that has shown up, that has made itself available to us, that has gone available to all MLAs in this House of Assembly. So why wouldn't you, if so many people are speaking out against something, why wouldn't you ask for further time to look at a bill? And that, again, is why that committee is there, in order to hear from the government. You know, that was the other thing that I found, you know, disheartening by the first Committee of the Whole House on Bills process, is that there was really no comment from the government side. and still as of yet, as opposition parties, have we been given a reason of why first contract arbitration is before us, why Bill 102 was brought forward to this House. So that in itself should give the opportunity for the government to spend some time and do a bit of a sales job. Explain to me, sell me on why this should happen. And if you sell me, or you sell other members of the House of Assembly that this is an important bill, well, okay, then at the same time you're selling the principles of the bill to all those organizations that have spoke out against it. And I don't think that those organizations are, unmoving as well, that it's their way or the highway. I think that any reasonable person or organization in Nova Scotia, that as they're working with the government, that they feel that their thoughts and their concerns are being heard, that they would accept, a bill that is better for them. Personally, I think that this bill should be left behind completely, and that something else needs to be drawn up in concert with the organizations. But this hasn't happened, and we've seen this. This is the second time that we've seen this. As we saw the running through of Bill 100. Bill 100. Many organizations came to here and said that we don't need the LMRC. That the LMRC should have been made up of course, the majority of the employers in Nova Scotia. The majority of employees in Nova Scotia, of course, are working for private companies, are working for the private sector. They're not working for government. So why wouldn't you take our suggestions, the suggestions of the Liberal Party and of the Conservative Party, that there needed to be business people on that committee? And that would, I think, would have tempered a first contract arbitration bill that came to this House of Assembly. But again, we all received a letter that had that LMRC split on the whole issue of first contract arbitration, that they felt that probably it wasn't the best time to bring it in. They couldn't come up to agreement amongst them. I think that's very telling, that even the committee that should have been the one that was going to suggest this couldn't come to a consensus with it. So why did the minister bring this here in the first place? So listen, this process is one that allows us to go back, to look at this some more, to truly, listen to Nova Scotians about this bill. And I can say that there are a number of MLAs in this House of Assembly that will be directly impacted by some of these decisions, these investment decisions, as we've heard time and time again in the House of Assembly or over in law amendments, and things that I know I could probably read verbatim here over and over again. But I'm not apt to do that because I think you all know the same sentiment that found its way through this process. Consult with us, talk to us. This isn't the right bill. This isn't the right time. And I find it discouraging, because our process is supposed to be one that is inclusive and open to all Nova Scotians. We're going to continue to watch this one, and here's the added thing. There's a lot of processes that can be brought forward in this House of Assembly to work on a sober second thought. This is but one of them, and I think the government should accept the fact that this is something that should be done. It's interesting that so many organizations are working together, which, a lot of times these businesses are busy. They, of course, have businesses to run, they have employees to take care of, they have purchasing to do, they have sales to do, on and on and on. And, to see such a large group of organizations working together to oppose something, I think is something I have never really seen in my 12 years of hanging around Province House, my 8 years of being an elected member. I have never seen that kind of cooperation amongst all these groups, and I think it's marvelous, because I think this turns a large group of individuals into a real powerhouse in trying to impact legislation in this House that is not only good for workers, because workers' rights are extremely important, and don't diminish that we're opposing this bill to be that we don't believe in workers' rights, that we don't believe in workers' safety, that we don't believe in the right of collective bargaining. By far, that's not what we're saying at all. We're simply saying that this is the wrong time for this kind of bill, looking at the economic climate that we are in right now. And I just saw there was some new numbers out by the Labour Market Brief from HRDC, and I'd love to have a chance to print them off and talk about them. And I know this government many times has talked about, we're in a really, a nice economic climate. Look at all the new jobs that are happening here in Metro. But I just saw another loss of jobs in southern Nova Scotia. We saw another loss of jobs in the Valley. We've seen another loss of jobs, of course, in Cape Breton and northern Nova Scotia. The only place that's really doing well, of course, is here in the capital, which we're very, very happy that it's happening here. But it should be happening in other places, and that's why this bill is the wrong bill, which is why we believe it should be recommitted back to that committee so that further work can be done. If Michelin, if Clearwater, if Sobeys, if all these companies are coming to us and saying this will impact in further investments in their companies, well, we should be very concerned about that. The success of Michelin has been phenomenal for the communities in all of Nova Scotia that they reside in. And, when an investment comes along, and whether it was the double-wide tires, I believe that went to the Valley plant, whether it's the further work at the Bridgewater plant, etc. Those are important investments that not only maintain the jobs in these communities, but also allow for further investment and more jobs to happen. If you look at the 3,500 jobs at Michelin, well, gee, that's actually more than this $25 billion shipbuilding contract will produce in this province. It's a lot more. It's double, and I thank the leader of the Liberal Party for that. It's double. So why don't we try to work with these companies to make sure that it maintains? So it's not just empty and hollow discussion that a company like Michelin would come forward and say these things. And I'm not going to profess that I'm smarter than Dana LeBlanc or the president of North America for Michelin. I think that he's a very intelligent individual, and there's a reason why he's president of North America. He came. That probably once or twice that a national president of Michelin has ever come before this legislature. I think we should heed his warning that this is bad for investment. I think we should heed the fact that he feels that it will stifle investment in Michelin, Nova Scotia. And as he tried to explain during his presentation at Law Amendments, they compete. Michelin competes internally for new processes, for new technology, for new jobs in Nova Scotia. I think that's extremely, extremely important. And for this, that we need to realize. And if the government is so hell-bent's the wrong word, and I don't really want to use it, but if they're so apt to run this one through, then why wouldn't they have spoken to companies like Michelin or Merit Contractors or, on and on? Why wouldn't they just have spoken to them and say, listen, we'd really like to do this? Well, again, being the sensible organizations that they are, I'm sure they would have said, well, okay, well, how about this? Let's trade off here and let's let that happen. But that's not what happened here. This is, again, the issue that I think all of us have taken on this bill. It's the fact that it was the arrogant way in which it was done. It was, never mind what anyone else says, we have a debt to pay here, so we need to bring this bill in. And that I think irks a lot of people, that you've had union leadership that have had tremendous influence upon the NDP over the years stand and say, well, there you go, we're asking for this. This is the payback that we require for all those years of work. I have a hard time with that. I really have a hard time with that because it just smells of old politics and old payoffs. And, you know, we thought we had moved on from this one. This is not something that we should be seeing. We should be doing this on the fair consultation with Nova Scotians. That's what it should be about. And we didn't see it here. We didn't see it here at all. And again, because of the weird way that this came in, you know, questions or puts a bit of a black cloud over it is that, you know, even though the minister had said over time and time again that we're still reviewing it, we're still looking at it, what happened was, well, we need to bring it in anyway. Never mind how it works. We're just going to do this anyway. This continues to need to go back. This amendment, I think, is reasonable. That it needs to go back and needs to have some true consultation. And again, I think that would be great if the minister would stand and say, "Listen, we're going to put it away. We're going to consult with all these organizations. We plan on bringing in a new bill in the next sitting." Great. That'll be a wonderful way to go about things. But we have the bill before us. It's the government's intention that this bill goes forward. And we're saying as an opposition party, the Progressive Conservatives have said that this is not the bill for Nova Scotia. This is not the right time. And that's why it needs to go back, which is why I'm bringing this amendment forward. And I think that we need to continue to look at it, to consider it. And should we all go home for Christmas in a few days, well then fine. It gives more time for those organizations to truly look at it, to truly have an opportunity to formulate their thoughts and provide it to the Minister of Workforce and Advanced Education so that you truly can have a discussion and maybe the department would look at it and say, okay, because of the recommendations and the concerns that are being brought forward, that we'll come up with a new bill. We'll bring it in. And like I said, I've committed that should the organization say, listen, this is not the bill that, you know, we completely want. It's not the bill that the government completely want, but it's something that we can live in, we can live with. Great. I think everybody could be so reasonable as that. That's how government, I believe, should work. You know, and maybe over the number of years that's not maybe how it happened. And I've heard the government throw things back at us and say, well, that's not how the Tories did it, that's not how the Liberals did it. But what we're hearing is we're seeing either the same old, or actually we're seeing just a step worse. That's why we need to bring this back. That's why this needs to go to the Committee of Whole House on Bills, so that there is an opportunity to hold on to it, to truly consult, because again, this has never been clear to me over this whole process of you know, how this ever showed up, how there has ever been a consultation on this. It sort of seemed like there was a light bulb that went off in someone's head somewhere, we don't know who, and all of a sudden a bill appears out of thin air. And Mr. Speaker, we know that this doesn't actually happen that way, that there had to have been hours of work and research that would have gone into this. And you would think the reasonable part would be to truly look at and to truly consult with the people that it would affect. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. And truly what we're asking is for it to go back. At the end of the day, the government will have to make its decision, and you know, and I don't have much hope that they're going to change their mind on this one, because they have been, I think, you know, that close-minded on this bill time and time again as this one has gone through. We've heard the Premier speak outside this chamber time and time again after question periods and in the media. About we're going to be doing this bill regardless of what the opposition is saying, regardless of what the majority of Nova Scotians are saying. He never goes as far as saying that this, of course, is you know, just paying that debt to their Labour friends. But that's really what it means, and I think Nova Scotians understand that. You know, a barometer that I use quite often on whether a bill is a good bill or a bad bill, or whether an idea is a good idea or a bad idea on behalf of government, is to go down to a coffee shop and listen to the scuttlebutt, to see what Nova Scotians are saying that may not be quite as informed about certain things, but hear the information flowing through the news, read the newspapers, hear it through radio, and to see what they say. And I can say that visiting my local coffee shops, Dennis Point Cafe and such, people are talking about Bill 102. They're actually talking about it, and they're saying, what is this government trying to do to rural Nova Scotia? Because they look at this as being an affront to rural Nova Scotia. They look at this bill not to be in the best interests. And so they ask, do what you can do to make sure that this bill either, gets a better sounding, gets the government to listen a little more, do whatever you need to do to make sure that Nova Scotians are not affected by bad legislation. That's what I hear at places like Dennis Point Cafe. That's the things that I'm hearing at the Hickory Hut. That's the things that I'm hearing at the places where I continue to use as a barometer on the mood of Nova Scotia, the mood of employees and workers and retired folk, and then you name it, we have the opportunity to consult with them on regular basis. That's the barometer that I put on things. Mr. Speaker, this bill was wrong when it came in. It was wrong the way it came in. And that's why I think that the recommittal to the other committee is again fully within order to at least give the government opportunity to stand and tell me, and not just tell me. To tell me is one thing. I write it on a hunk of paper and give it to me later on. But to truly sell me on the issue of first contract arbitration, to sell me on why we believe, or why the government believes that this bill should go forward for the protection of employees, why the government feels that this is the right time to put the economy, or to put a cloud over the economy when we're so starved for investment by different companies or different organizations or different kinds of businesses in this province. I would love to see further investment happen in places like Southwest Nova Scotia or the Valley, further investment by individuals who now have said that this will create a cloud, this will create uncertainty, this will create something that is not appropriate for us. And that's why this bill needs to be recommitted to the Committee on Whole House on Bills. We have not had the opportunity, or at least the government has not had the opportunity to sell the idea, to sell the issue of first contract to us or to all of Nova Scotia. And I think it is time that the government does do this. I think there's so much that we can say, but I can see that the government really isn't listening to anything here. And I will take the opportunity to see what will happen over the next stages of this debate. I still believe that this is the right thing to do, that a recommittal to the whole House on bills is the correct thing to do. It is something that we as opposition parties have in our toolbox to allow further debate, to allow further and sober second thought to happen on it. But again, this really falls within the hands of the government on whether they want to be known as an anti-investment government, want to be anti-business in Nova Scotia, and want to be anti-rural Nova Scotia. And this bill does all of those things. And I think that is one of those things that I don't understand why many members of this government are allowing this to go through, because many of those members have Michelins in their backyards, have Clearwaters in their backyards. All of us have Sobeys. Well, actually, I don't have a Sobeys, but many of you do. So why? And I think a recommittal of this bill, I think, is extremely important to allow that continued sober second thought to this bill. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to this amendment. I think this amendment is in order. I think this amendment is the right thing to do at this time, and I hope that all members of this House will support the amendment as it moves forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise for a few minutes and speak to this amendment. Mr. Speaker, we just came out of Committee of the Whole House, and I'm sure you remember the debate, because even though you weren't in the chair, I'm sure you were listening downstairs to all of the discussion that was happening. You know, we went through law amendments. We listened to employers across this province. We came in here. They actually quite thoughtfully and respectfully came to this legislature to law amendments, made suggestions about how this bill could be improved. Mr. Speaker, as I made in my comments on the Committee of the Whole House, union leaders came forward also suggesting there could be changes. We made those suggestions to government, Mr. Speaker, and ironically, we made the very amendments here in this House. We put them to the floor of this House. And the leader of the Conservative Party stands up and says there's not enough lipstick to put on this pig to make it acceptable. Well, Mr. Speaker, I suggest they found the lipstick tube at some point over the last few days. My suggestion is they probably realized that they were dug too deep on this piece of legislation. That Nova Scotians have said, let's find compromise. And the very letter that has come forward actually talks about supporting the amendments they voted against. The very letter they're using says they voted against. What we need to know is if we go back to the Committee of the Whole House, are they going to vote for the amendments with us, or are they going to vote with the government? Again. They voted with the government. Against Sobeys, against Clearwater, against almost every presentation that happened in law amendments. What happened? This very letter that we're using to move this back to Committee Whole House speaks to our amendments, speaks to the very amendments they voted against. They sided with government. You know what this letter says and what this amendment says and what we said in Committee Whole House? We need compromise. We absolutely need compromise. Every Nova Scotian, listen, ideally, we'd like this bill to disappear, but you know what? Even the business in this community recognize they have a majority government. Just like they had a majority government at one time, just like we did at one point. But what we had is we went to law amendments and we asked the business community to come in and we asked union leaders to come in. And Mr. Speaker, I would encourage every member of this House to read what was said in law amendments. And there's a moderate middle that was in the law amendments. And the moderate middle was to say, put these amendments forward so that we can move FCA, first contract arbitration, away from the Manitoba model, which is what's being presented by this government, more towards what most Canadians fall under, which is the federal model, Ontario model, where you don't just automatically go in to an arbitrator. You have to prove somebody's bargaining in bad faith. And that's what business community says, and that's what our amendments were about. And they voted against them. That's what Sobeys said we should do. They voted against them. That's what Clearwater said we should do. They voted against them. We're trying to find a way. We're trying to find a way. Listen, I know they have a majority government. I recognize that. You know what? It's my hope, just like on Bill 100, there was an amendment at some point during third reading. It's my hope that over the last number of days, listen, it's no secret, we've asked Nova Scotians, particularly we took radio ads out in parts of this province, asking Nova Scotians to reach their MLA. We will hope they have. We hope they listen. We hope they've listened to the employers. But quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, we hope they listen to the union leaders, because an awful lot of union leaders are suggesting we just need FCA. And we can take a more moderate approach. So, Mr. Speaker, if we're going back into Committee of the Whole House, and if we go back, we're more than prepared to participate, more than prepared to continue the debate. But let it be about accepting the amendments that were put before law amendments that they've already voted against. Can we have some commitment out of them? Can we have some commitment of them if we go back into Committee Whole House and we present the amendments that they're going to stand with Sobeys and Clearwater and the Liberal caucus to try to make changes to first contract arbitration? Mr. Speaker, there's a moderate middle in this province. We all try to find a way politically. We all say we move to the centre. Well, this piece of legislation gives everyone in this House an opportunity to send a very clear signal to Nova Scotians. The process works. We've invited you into law amendments to make suggestions. We presented our amendments. We recognize the majority government. We know you're not going to get rid of the legislation, but here's what we think you can do to improve it. And you know what? Everyone who presented would say to government, you listened. You listened. You know what? Government also could turn around and say to their base, whoever wants FCA, the vast majority of them want FCA. They don't necessarily want the Manitoba model. They could say to them, you know what? We listened and we delivered. And then they could go to the business community and say, we're not as scary as you think. We've listened to what you've told us. We've made some amendments. And I hear we've made some amendments. Mr. Speaker, you know what? You know what? It could really go a long way to actually maybe improving participation in law amendments. It could go a long way in improving participation in democracy. All of these business owners don't have extra time to sitting around and they come down here. They want to make sure when they come to present that someone's actually paying attention. And I think if we go back, and look at what was presented in law amendments, and Mr. Speaker, look at the amendments that our caucus presented in committee of the whole House that the Conservatives voted with the government against them, I think you'd find that we listened and we found that moderate middle. We found that spot in the center that would give some reassurance to the business community and to employees across this province that their government is listening not only to the unionized workforce, but the non-union workforce as well. Mr. Speaker, it is important for someone in that caucus to stand up and say, as we go through, if we are going back to the committee of the whole House, that they're going to stand with the Liberal caucus on their amendments to improve this legislation. You got your answer. The leader of the Conservative Party says they're not. The very basis of this letter, they're against Sobeys. They're against Clearwater. They're against the largest private sector employer in this province, 10,000 employees. 10,000. They're against them. Now think about that, Mr. Speaker. A Conservative Party in Nova Scotia against the largest private sector employer. Mr. Speaker, the largest private sector employer, and they're against them. Now, it makes no sense. Now, when we go back to this, if we're going to go back to the committee of the whole House, stand with us. Stand with Sobeys. Stand with Clearwater. Make sure your voice is heard. We could be united on this side. We could be united, Mr. Speaker. Just imagine, all of us elected on this side, 10,000 people working for Sobeys, 1,100 working for Clearwater, Mr. Speaker, and countless of hundreds of other private sector employees would be standing behind us with the changes to the amendments and would be looking squarely across at government. That's how we're going to get this bill changed. That's how we could have changed it. That's how we should have changed it. And it is my hope that government listens as we debate this, whether it's in committee of the whole House or third reading. And equally as important, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that they listen to the Nova Scotians who are calling their office and say, find moderation, find the middle ground, cause my employer to feel more comfortable. I want job security. All of the things that we're hearing, they can do that, Mr. Speaker. So if we're going back to the committee of the whole House, let's get some assurance out of that caucus that they're going to vote for the amendments that were put in front of law amendments by the largest employers in this province in the private sector, Mr. Speaker. With those few words, I'll take my seat.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't expecting to get such a chuckle on the debate over this amendment that we were into comedy hour here in the House, but I did note with amusement the remarks of the previous speaker, because the fact of the matter is we are against what the government is proposing to do. I believe that we are of similar mind on this side, that we are against what the government is proposing to do. The amendment, the purpose of the amendment is to refer back to committee for a whole variety of reasons. Every member on the opposition side can pick which reason they prefer. If a member wants amendments, the chance for amendments can come back again anew that is a good thing. If you want to ensure that more Nova Scotians have a chance to have their say on this bill, you should also be in favor of the amendment to go back to committee, because that is exactly what the amendment purports to do, Mr. Speaker. So I believe that the previous speaker was saying that he supports the amendment. I'm not certain, but I just want to remind all members on this side what we're trying to accomplish, which is to wake up the government, to show the intensity of the opposition to what they're doing, that we all shoot in the right direction, which is over there, so that something good can happen for Nova Scotia and we can avoid something bad that is about to happen for Nova Scotia. So with respect to the government, Mr. Speaker, who is, of course, the target of all this, I couldn't help but note with great dismay that the House Leader on the government side, the Deputy Premier, in arguing against even allowing the amendment, referred to some of us over here as sore losers for wanting to have further debate and further discussion and further input on Bill 102. Well, Mr. Speaker, setting aside how arrogant a statement like that is, it does not only direct it at the...
Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Ask you to keep the leader of the third party speaking about the amendment, not something that bothers him, but the reality of what's in the substance of the amendment. A party that has very little substance, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. No, I'm sorry. He doesn't tell me to do my job, sir. That's one thing he doesn't do. I'll tell you that right off the bat. But I'll tell you one thing right now is that when I read this amendment and I agreed with the motion was in order, I read to all the members of the chamber that confine themselves to the motion, that is the merits of recommitting the Bill 102 to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. So I'll remind all members again to please do that. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I will certainly do that. Mr. Speaker, the reason for the amendment to recommit to the committee is that there are lots of new pieces of information that have come forward, even in the last little while, that make it very important that this House recommit to committee and reconsider its actions. Among those reasons, Mr. Speaker, is the most recent labour market brief, which does bother me, Mr. Speaker, and I'll tell you why. Because it's very relevant to this bill, because it's new since this bill first came before the House in committee. And here's what bothers me about the labour market brief for November 2011. And I'll quote from it, and then I'll table it, and I'll tell you why it's relevant to this amendment, Mr. Speaker. It says, the Cape Breton labour market continues to deteriorate. The labour market also continues to weaken in northern Nova Scotia. The labour force decreased sharply in the valley. The labour market continues to deteriorate in southern Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, in the valley, in the northern region, in Pictou County, in the South Shore, there are some very important employers in those areas, Michelin being an obvious example. And the labour market brief points out, in the valley, 2,200 jobs gone. There's a Michelin plant in the valley. In the southern Nova Scotia, in the South Shore, 1,700 jobs gone in the last year. There's a Michelin plant there. Michelin came forward. They said, we don't want this at all. It's a black mark against Nova Scotia. Now we find out that in the very areas where Michelin actually operates as the largest private employer, they say this is a bad idea. This is why we're opposed to first contract arbitration. This is new since the committee met. This is something that is worthy of consideration, that in those areas, jobs are being lost. And the biggest employers in those areas are telling us first contract arbitration would be a black mark when they're considering reinvesting in the plants that they have now or future investment. Mr. Speaker, that's why this amendment to recommit is so important, because we have new information like the labour market survey, which I will table for everybody's benefit. And of course, yesterday, Mr. Speaker, just yesterday, an open letter to the Premier from 19 employers who are signatories to the letter, but representing tens of thousands of other employers and 200,000 employees, are telling the Premier, are telling this House, this is a bad idea. well, we ought to go back to committee and consider what these people are having to say. That is exactly what the amendment is for, Mr. Speaker. The letter here says they are speaking unanimously with one voice that first contract arbitration is a bad idea. Now, Mr. Speaker, at this time, when we are losing jobs by the thousands in the Valley, in the South Shore, in Pictou County, and in other places, and 200,000 employees worth of people come forward and tell us now is not the time for first contract arbitration, well, you know, we should listen to that. And the government has failed to listen to that. And the amendment gives them one more chance to listen to that. That's why the amendment is so important. That's why the motion to recommit is so important. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 2 days ago, the Premier spoke to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and he told them that anyone with a good idea can call his office about how to create jobs. The very next day, 200,000 people write to him through their representatives and say, here's a good idea, stop first contract arbitration. So let's go back into committee and consider that. Hello, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly what the Premier apparently is inviting people to do. So let's give them that chance. Let's give the government that chance. Hello. If you're in the Liberal Party and you think, great, we can bring back our amendments again and take a bad bill and make it a little less bad, that's a good reason to support the amendment. If you're in the PC party and you say it's a bad bill, more people need to come forward, they're going to tell the government it's a bad bill, 200,000 are lining up to come tell them that, then you should also be in support of the amendment because we'll give them that chance. Mr. Speaker, the government cannot afford, or more importantly, Nova Scotia cannot afford at this time to get this wrong. And so if this many people are making that point, we ought to give them the chance to make that point. That's right. And reconsider this bad step that the government seems so determined to take. So that when the Premier says, call my office if you have an idea, that people don't get a dial tone when they do, or that they don't conclude that the Premier only means call my office if you agree, or if I agree with what you have to say. But if I don't agree with what you have to say, you can write me a letter, but it doesn't matter because you can call my office and we're not going to listen. This is a chance to actually make the government listen. Mr. Speaker, just to be clear on the testimony of companies like Michelin and Sobeys and the wonderful Canadian Federation of Independent Business and all the people that they represent, Merit contractors and their great representatives and all the people that they represent, they came to law amendments and they said over and over, this is a bad idea. It is the wrong time. This will hurt investment. This will cost jobs. There is no problem to solve. Things are going well. Why would you mess it up now? That's what they said. And their first choice is that we stop this bill in its tracks. Their first choice is that there be no bill at all. Their first choice is that we allow the process of free collective bargaining where each side has a motive to reach an agreement, to bargain in good faith, to set the price of wages and benefits and other things between employer and employee, to come together to make their business as great as it can be, to create as many jobs as they can. That is the process that is working in Nova Scotia. That is what they're asking for. The government is not going to give it to them because they're determined on first contract arbitration. We are representing them when we say this is a bad idea and it should be stopped. And that is why I say, Madam Speaker, that when the House Leader on the government side says, oh, the PCs are sore losers because they are not getting their way on first contract arbitration, it's very relevant to this amendment because through us, he's also making that point to all of those people who came forward and said it's a bad idea, that expected their government to represent them, that said there should be no first contract arbitration, that said this is the wrong time. Perhaps what they're really hearing through their representatives that are trying to stop it is that they're not getting their way, so they're all sore losers too. And with all due respect, Madam Speaker, that is a very disrespectful position for the government to take on this amendment, that if you're in favor of the amendment, that you're a sore loser, which is what they said, because they have to realize that through us, there are thousands of employers, 200,000 employees, who are not going to appreciate, as they look at the debate on the amendment, that the government considers them to be sore losers. That, Madam Speaker, is a real shame, and I probably should have tabled this letter a while ago, but I keep referring to it for the very reason that there's far more than the members of the Progressive Conservative Caucus that are trying to tell the government that this is a bad idea and this is a bad time. And so for all of those reasons, Madam Speaker, I can only urge the government to listen, to wake up to what they're doing, to hear from all the people in the province, employers or employees, that are saying this is a bad idea, that this is the wrong time, that this has to go back to committee so we can hear from more people, amendments or otherwise. That is what has to happen, Madam Speaker. That is what the amendment allows to happen, and I hope that somewhere on the government side there is a member who has a Michelin plant in their riding, or who has another manufacturer in their riding, who has a blueberry manufacturer in their riding, has a Sobeys in their riding, has a contractor in their riding, has a road paver in their riding, has an underwear manufacturing plant in their riding, which, by the way, makes very good underwear, I can tell you, Madam Speaker.
Take it from experience.
I happen to be wearing their product myself right now.
Too much information.
Order, please. I would remind the member that underwear is not on the amendment. Perhaps we can come back to what is the merits of the amendment. I recognize the honourable leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do agree I strayed a little bit off topic there at the end when I got into that particular product. But the point is, Madam Speaker, going back to committee gives members on the government side that have important manufacturers like Stanfield's, like Michelin, like Sobeys, and many, many others, like Polycello, like Oxford Frozen Foods, a chance to reconsider their actions before some real damage is done. And with those few remarks, as colorful as they sometimes were, I will take my place.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I heard someone say you're going to talk briefly. I can guarantee it. Look, Madam Speaker, what we're talking about here today is going back into the committee of the whole host to talk about a bill that has been on the minds of many Nova Scotians for the last few weeks. The motion, when it was made, the host leader for the government said, well, you had your chance, you had your time. And you know, he is right and factual in that. But the reality is, in the past 24 hours, there has been some new information come to light. That information was on behalf of 200,000 employees in the province of Nova Scotia. Now, I'm not sure what the other members of this House think, but I know what I think. I think that my job here, and the job of anyone who has been elected by the people of the province of Nova Scotia, is to bring forward their wishes. Not the wishes of my caucus, or the Liberal caucus, or the NDP caucus. My job is to bring forward the wishes and the concerns of the people that we represent. A letter representing 200,000 people tells me that they still feel that their wishes haven't been heard. And that's why I believe that this is a motion is in order. Because I think, Madam Speaker, that what we need to do is make sure that everyone feels that they've been heard. And as we go down the road past that, whatever the decisions are made in this House, that will happen. And we know there's a majority government and we know where it could take us. But we've also got a responsibility to the ones that sent us here. And I think that all members of this House are failing in doing that. We're failing in doing that because time after time, we're hearing from people. They're saying that they are not happy with this legislation. I sat in the House in Law Amendments, Madam Speaker, when Colin MacDonald was there, and he brought forward his concerns on this piece of legislation. And he said at that time that there were some amendments that could be made. But when he was finally asked at the end of that session, does this province really need this bill? Will this amendments make this bill any better? He said no. The long and the short of it is, this bill is not a good bill. And that's the reason we have to go back to the Committee of the Whole and listen to the thousands of employers and the thousands of employees who want their voices heard. And that is an obligation of every member in this House, to make sure that people have the opportunity to be heard. Not just listen to the wishes of the front benches of our parties, not just to listen to the chiefs of staffs of our parties, but to listen to what the individuals who elected us to be here want us to bring forward. And Madam Speaker, I would say to you that if we as a group of people fail to do that, then we are bringing dishonor on this House, on this process, and on the people of Nova Scotia who put their trust in us to do what was right for them. Thank you.
The motion is that the Bill number 102 be recommitted to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. All in favour say aye. There's been a call for recorded vote. Would the clerk please ring the bells? For 1 hour.